Hello, and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Headlines. I'm Ryan Gilchrest, Managing Editor with the Post and Courier Greenville. Thanks for being with us today. Joining me today is Eric Connor, reporter for Post and Courier Greenville. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Eric and I are near each other, but not in the same room. He's right next door. So, Eric, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Okay. Well, I'm Eric. I am a writer who covers the city of Greenville, mostly, and some features. I'm also a local editor. And I've been here as long as I've worked here. Came to Greenville in 1999, covered a whole number of things, and I've covered the city since 2015. So I can pretty much answer, I think, most things.
Okay. Well, we have plenty of good questions for you today. And of course, I'd tell anyone who's watching, please feel free to submit questions as we go along. As they occur to you, we'll try to answer everything we can in the time allotted. We're going to talk about the city of Greenville, and obviously we're going to talk a bit about the pandemic. We're going to talk about how things are recovering as we begin to open some things back up. We'll probably have some time for some other discussion as well. There's some development news and some other things going on that hopefully we'll have time to touch on at the end of this. But why don't we get started, Eric, talking a bit about what's been going on for the last year. And why don't you just briefly summarize a pandemic in the city of Greenville for us? Over the past year, what we've seen, what's happened, and get us up to the point of what happens next.
Well, like everywhere else, everything escalated quickly. I remember the last big event I was at was the SEC Women's Championship. And then next thing you know, everything began to shut down. We kept thinking, things were gonna, any moment things could improve, or, a festival on down the road might be able to happen. But city council went virtual. I remember walking down Main Street. You practically just walk it as if it was a sidewalk. Then there was some action taken beyond shutdowns. Greenville was the first city in South Carolina to enact a mask ordinance around June, which is about the time Post and Courier Greenville started up. So I think it was my first story actually here. And there was a time throughout the pandemic where city council met at the convention center. We had COVID press conferences every day. Then more festivals got canceled. And there was a time where we thought things might get back to normal in June, and then the summer spike. And, ever since then, things have kind of stayed, the city stayed pretty locked down. We've gotten to this point where it seems like things are going to kind of open back up.
So obviously with spring coming, there are a lot of events that would normally be popping up, and certainly it isn't back to what it would be prior to last year, but there's some big things that are starting to happen. Talk a little bit about some of the things that are coming up in the next month or two, as well as the restrictions that'll still be in place.
Okay. Well, the mask ordinance is something that has been renewed every 2 months. There's never been any controversy about it. It's pretty much people have been on board in terms of voting for it, and it's been a given that it's going to be renewed. It's coming up again next month, and it seems like probably it'll continue because I think the city is of a mind that it's not time yet to not do that. But the city is reopening in terms of public events. Artist Fair is coming up. That's going to be happening just in a different way. Saturday Market will be happening. There's new concert series. City Council is going to pretty soon start meeting in person again. I think as things go along, the warmer it gets, it remains to be seen what things are on hold now might, be put back on.
Right. And obviously vaccination is still ongoing around the state. There's a long way to go before herd immunity is reached. So there's still going to be a lot of restrictions in place. I know Artist Fair is sort of restricting its boundaries a little bit. There's reservations that have to be made, so only a certain amount of people can be there at any one time. What other types of restrictions are in place? Like, for example, at the new concert series, things like that.
Well, the new concert series, two of the most famous or popular events in downtown Greenville is the Downtown Alive on Thursdays and Main Street Fridays music. And those still remain to be seen whether they'll happen. But the city has, in the meantime, created Sound Check. And it's a concert series that's going to happen every Wednesday beginning next week all the way through September. But the way they're doing it is, you wear a mask, they have pods, you pre-register, so it's going to look different, but it's a beginning. And I know Artisphere is, requires registration, but they're going to be very diligent about it. They're going to set up barriers, require ticketing to get in, and they'll have a session where everyone who's attending the festival will be able to do it, and then they'll clear them out and bring in the next group of people. And I know when they announced that Artisphere was happening, that was the big major one, first thing major to fall last year, which is a big bummer. When the mayor was announcing the Artisphere was on, he called it a sign of, Greenville reopening. And looking ahead, to events like the 4th of July, anything that requires people to be in close contact. I think that's one reason why the concerts up on Main Street, there's still some question about it, because that is a pretty close contact deal. And a lot of people want to know about Fall for Greenville. If all these others are happening, it seems like, it seems like there's got to be some way they'll have it. It's the most popular festival in Greenville, but remains to be seen.
Right. That seems to be sort of the general atmosphere at this point. Is we're going to try to do everything and put in restrictions in place that allow those things to happen. Now, sports never went all the way away. The Greenville Triumph played, the Swamp Rabbits have been playing at Bon Secours Wellness Arena, but baseball did. Baseball disappeared last year, and of course, Fluor Field is a significant part of the west end of downtown. There've been some college games, some other things going on this spring, but baseball is coming back in May as well, correct?
It is, and man, isn't that great? There's no better place to be than outside, and they're going to have some distancing restrictions, but that is going to be really nice. They're changing up their schedule where they play longer home stands and things like that, so things will look a little different, but yeah, that's great.
The obviously restricted seating and various things like that. It did sound like in speaking to some of the folks with the organization, they're still not quite sure when those seating restrictions will change. And I know soccer and hockey are facing the same issues. The SEC women's tournament, had restricted, I think they called it pod seating, where groups could sit together if they knew each other, but then there was separation. And so it's still a good long ways away from a full stadium, right? We're nowhere close to that.
We're nowhere close to that. I really wish that we could say we were. And I would love for Thirsty Thursdays to come back. It's time for this. I know we got a ways to go, but man,
all right. Well, it sounds like if I lose Eric at any point, I know where to find him. Well, let's address a few other things. Let me check and see. And of course, again, if anybody has additional questions on that topic, please let us know. We'll be happy to jump in. But let's talk about a couple other things while I've got you here, Eric. And it's been kind of a newsy couple of weeks with the city. A few things you've written about. Let's talk a little bit about some of the development things that are going on. And this kind of ties back into what we've already talked to, because 2020 was an unusual year, and we are seeing some movement along those lines now that everything's sort of semi trying to return to normal. The development moratorium that came up recently with City Council on their virtual meeting, which, as you mentioned, they're soon going to return to in person. tell us a little bit about what that means. It's not a complete shutdown of development inside the city. What are the details on that?
Yeah, so the development moratorium is a product of the comprehensive plan and how the city needs to develop over the next 20 years. And one of the key parts of that is redoing the land management ordinance to one of the concepts is nodes of development that have higher density. They're almost like tiny little mini towns. And that's a big task that will take months. And in the meantime, development is booming and and they were feeling pressure of gentrification and commercial creep, they call it, into traditional neighborhoods, particularly in two districts, the Nicholtown area and west of Greenville, where there's a lot of investment coming in. And so it was one of those things where it came up, it pretty much just came up on a Friday before the Monday they were going to vote on it. And, I have to say it's not typical of how things, come up in city council meetings, but it really just sort of appeared, and the home builders and developers were caught off guard. I think some city council members were caught off guard over how communication went. I think there were people who were surprised there wasn't as much support for it. People changed their positions on it, and ultimately what they realize is that, or they say, is that it's too much. It's too draconian. I know that there's a concern about the reputation of Greenville as being a investment friendly community, and how you raise the white flag, and you're out there as someone who is not friendly to that anymore. And I believe that what they're going to try to do, they're going to take a couple weeks. They're going to come back middle of this month and try to see if there's ways to slow down development. And the development would be limitations near single family homes. And see if there's a way not to have a moratorium. But as far as it stands now that I know of, there is going to be a vote at the end of the month. We'll see if it happens, if they have a compromise and don't vote on it. But I don't know that there's support for it. It doesn't seem that there's majority support for it, but it's definitely a sign of the growth and development here.
Right. And I think, I don't remember the exact figure from your article, but it was something like 2,000 or 2,500 acres of the city, which was maybe about a quarter of the land in that area was affected. It wasn't as expansive as maybe it seemed at first. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, it's pretty limited. I mean, there's projects that were already in the works, planned developments, the area around Unity Park, because they had already put in some restrictions on that. So it's pretty targeted, but still pretty impactful.
Right. All right. Well, while we're talking about development, earlier this week, our colleague Anna Mitchell wrote about a big development being proposed in West End. I know you've had an additional conversation since then, and there's this meeting coming up on that as well. What can you tell us about that, and what might be next for that development?
Yeah, so it's a development of that is basically the West End Community Development Center. It's one of the biggest vacant, because there's a lot of parking lot. It's one of the biggest remaining developable pieces of land in the West End. And the plan is it's a Charlotte developer, Suncap, who wants to come in, build 250 apartments, mixed use, kind of what we have seen all along the West End recently. Anna reported on an informal review before the Design Review Board. That is where they get an idea of what the board members think. But the actual meeting is this evening. And when I was talking to the developer yesterday, he was trying to impress that this is going to be a project that is well thought out. They're going to really focus on the quality of the retail. They're going to have a parking garage that has almost 600 spaces, and then he talked about possibly more, to accommodate traffic for the baseball field in West End in general. They seemed like they said they communicated with the community, and the community's on board, but when these meetings happen, that's when we really find out. I do know that he said there's no plans for affordable housing, and I haven't seen many projects get through recently without some concession on that.
Right. Now, a good portion of that land is currently owned by a church, correct?
Yeah, Allen Temple, they've been there forever, and they've been at the center of a lot of this the pressures of this growth when Floorfield came in, back in 2004, 2005. They had to consult with them, and the field was even built in a way to not be imposing to them, to match the brick of the area and stuff like that. So to see them developing their property is a major deal, because the West End Center has been a hub of community activity in the African American community, and presidential candidates go through their polling place. It's really beyond just the new development potentially. That's a pretty important part of the West End.
Did the developer talk at all about that piece of it? Do you have any more information about what the future might hold for that piece of the property?
He didn't address exactly what the history of that. One of the things he said when I asked him about affordable housing is that with the money that the church gets, the church already invests in affordable housing initiatives and pursues them and creates them. And he said with the money that they get from the sale, the church can vastly expand its affordable housing initiatives. But still, a project that doesn't have affordable housing as a component is something I've not seen go through.
Yeah, I'm going to go off script here and ask you about that. You've mentioned it a couple times that a lot of projects that have been approved lately have had to incorporate some piece of accommodation for affordable housing. For those who aren't as familiar with it, explain the concept of affordable housing and the city's approach to that, with recent projects.
Well, clearly Greenville has an affordable housing problem, like a lot of cities that are growing like we are, and the people moving in from other bigger metropolitan areas. So they're coming in with more money to pay for a house than people here can afford. So the city recognized this a few years back, created the Greenville Housing Fund that they contribute money to, and their job is to find projects. And one of the things that is unlike the old days of creating a complex of projects for low income housing, is they want to include it in more the market rate development, so that it's imperceptible that someone is living in an affordable home. And what it does, it diversifies culture and socioeconomic. It's a way to not have to worry about people saying not in my backyard. And so when developers come in, if they give a 10% of their housing to affordable housing, the city has made it clear that they'll look favorably upon that, because it's a big initiative and there's limited ways to keep things affordable. Right.
Yeah, and the affordable housing is typically described as some percentage of the area's average mean income, and I know 40 and 60% is often thrown around there. So let's bridge on to another development issue, a slightly different one, and one tied to a question that one of the folks who are watching this sent in, which relates to trees. And you and I have heard people make the pun about Greenville losing its green a couple of times. But you've written a few times about the area's tree canopy, the reduction over the last several years. What's the latest on that, and what steps is the city taking to try to slow that loss?
Yeah, so trees is something that definitely defines the area, and we've been losing it. 20 years ago, I believe, took a number of years, 41% of the city was covered in tree canopy, and today they expect it to be 25%. So earlier, a couple months ago, they updated their tree ordinance to make it so that it's basically a 1-for-1 deal. Like if you cut a tree, for every tree cut down, one's planted somewhere or money is put into a fund. And the biggest question was, do you make a single family housing development? A person who owns their own home contributed to that, and they decided they did it. There's some exceptions. It exempts current homeowners, and like if a tree's dead, you don't have to pay for that. But and then it's all part of the comprehensive plan for the next 20 years, just like with the land management ordinance and the moratorium. They when it comes to trees, they have tough decisions to make about how to manage growth, so that if they create more density in these nodes I talked about earlier, that frees more space. But how much money do you have to buy land is something they have to consider. And I know that they've tried to come up with a balance of that, but we'll see how it goes. But there has been a political will to save trees.
And some of the fines and costs related to that largely relate to the size and age of trees, right?
Yeah, the bigger a tree, a heritage tree, I believe it's called, that's going to cost more. I know one of the figures is that there's going to be no more than a $25,000 per acre cost. That's a lot of money to me. So it could be costly to take down trees.
We've got a few minutes left, and again, if anyone's watching and wants to throw in questions, we'll try to get to everything we can. Eric, you recently wrote a bit about Unity Park. Obviously, that is a huge chunk of land, adjacent to downtown, and folks driving by may have noticed sort of increasing levels of activity there over the last several months. What's the latest there, and what are the next steps that are happening down at Unity Park?
Well, Unity Park is the biggest civic project in Greenville since Falls Park 20 years ago. And it's been it was envisioned as far back as 1907. And about 5 years ago, it really began in earnest to move. Cities quietly bought up properties in the area, about 50 acres, if I remember correctly. And was poised to do this. So it's in a long neglected area. And everyone's been very transparent about how this area has been dumped on, traditionally poor, traditionally minority. And so, this project has its pluses and minuses in terms of how that's concerned. With the investment comes higher cost of housing. They've set aside some of that land they scooped up back in those years ago to accommodate affordable housing. But it really began in earnest. They moved Public Works with the dumping ground, and that was the first major step a couple of years ago. And then once they demolished that, they began in earnest to begin work on it. And then COVID hit, and there were some questions about how would it move forward? Could it move forward? What was the impact on the budget, especially with with restaurants? I mean, it's funded by hospitality taxes. What does that look like if you're still going forward with this park while restaurants are shutting down, struggling? So they took some of the money, did micro grants for businesses, but it turns out the hit on the budget and hospitality and all that was not as bad as they thought. So they pretty much fired it back up, and they're not on the original schedule, but right now they're pretty much on schedule for next spring. And right now you're seeing river work where they're making the river flow more naturally. You're seeing groundwork for children's playground, spray ground, and things are moving along pretty quickly.
When you mentioned the river flowing more naturally, I thought that was an interesting part of your story, to understand how some of the impacts of industry in the past had an effect on the flooding issues and some other things. What give a little bit of that history and talk a little bit about some of the measures they're putting in place to cut that down.
Yeah, so if you look today at what they've done along the river there, it looks pretty stark. It looks like they took all the trees down, and it almost looks like a beach. There's a few sticks there, but they have the idea is that back when the railroad companies came through, they took the river and dug it deep and made it into basically like a ditch where, channelized it. And whenever it rains a whole lot, that causes the water to jump out real quick, and and there's no place for it to dissipate. So what they're aiming to do is create more wetlands, expand the bank a little bit, make it where that flooding is not as bad. And for all the trees, it does look bare. For all the trees that are gone, they say you'll see a whole lot more, and most of it was that they're invasive species and not particularly conducive to the best way to manage the environment there. And it's key to flooding downstream. Fixing flooding at Unity Park fixes flooding in Falls Park and fixes flooding in Cleveland Park. So river restoration is a big part of what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, and all of this connects back into sort of the master plan designed around Swamp Rabbit Trail and everything else, right? It's all connected together.
Yeah, to see how the city has developed over the years, in the past few years, the Swamp Rabbit Trail just, it's radiating outward, and those parts of the west side of town that I think a lot of people didn't know where the streets were, and now they're becoming more common knowledge, and where the trail is going is where people are investing. The trail is going to expand down Lawrence Road at some point, the big flyover bridge over Lawrence Road, and a lot of development along there that people are betting on it coming, and they've ripped up the rail lines, and pretty soon I'm going to do an update on where that's at. I think people are curious about that.
Oh, good. Well, that's news for me, folks. Eric is making assignments live on the air, so you're committed to that one, Eric. I'll be looking for a deadline and a word count right after this.
Gotcha.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions in there. I appreciate everyone who took the time to listen today. We're always glad to have you. We'll be back again, looks like right at the end of April, with another upstate edition of Beyond the Headlines. So definitely look for that. Something to look forward to. We'll also post this recording on our website in case you want to watch it again or share it with a friend. It should be up sometime in the next 24 hours or so. You can support our work by signing up for any of our free newsletters. You can find that at postandcourier.com/Greenville/newsletter-sign up, or you can simply go to postandcouriergreenville.com or postandcourier.com/Greenville. Go up to the top of the newsletters in the navigation bar and look for the one that says Greenville Newsletters. Paid subscribers make our brand of journalism possible. You can help us keep our communities informed if you subscribe. We appreciate your support. You can subscribe now to the Post and Courier at postandcourier.com/Greenville/subscribe. Or again, just go to postandcourier.com/Greenville and look for the subscribe button. Appreciate your time so much today. On behalf of Eric, we thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Post and Courier being a family-owned local brand to the state that's committed to journalism provides that network that I don't think you're going to get anywhere else. The Post and Courier brand gives off a sense of optimism and opportunity. We answer to readers and we answer to a higher calling. Money that's invested into the newspaper is invested back into the community. By subscribing, you allow us to keep doing what we're doing and be a part of something bigger that connects South Carolina